Today's La Gran Pregunta: who is Barcelona's most underrated player? And one of the good reasons that Diego is on this show today is because he is one half of a podcast with a Real Madrid supporter on his show. And part of that dilemma is that Diego has just done all this winning in the last week, and it probably has created not necessarily a little bit of an awkward situation, but it seems that Barcelona have not only taken the upper hand, but they've taken the upper hand without the use, if you will, in the last week of Lionel Messi. So that's why we're asking today, who's Barcelona's most underrated player? And I guess we can do this through the scope of the last two Clásicos from the week, but a more of a broader picture of all season long and just knowing what a lot of these guys are capable of. Let's start with the most recent El Clásico, Diego, and we'll give our picks at the end, but let's break through some of the possibilities. For me, the man of the match for El Clásico was Ivan Rakitic, and the reason I start here is because I think not only is he the most polarizing member of FC Barcelona for we'll call them the FC Barcelona social media community, but Rakitic does his job, I think, better than everybody else. There's such a connection now tying him together in that narrative with Ernesto Valverde that because Rakitic is, we'll say, the perfect player for the way Valverde plays, it seems that there is a bias that, well, Rakitic is only useful. It's an if-then kind of clause, if you know what I'm saying, where, you know, if Valverde is the coach, then Rakitic is at his best and the most useful. But he's also been good under Enrique, and it's surprised that he's been here for almost half a decade, and yet people are still kind of questioning whether or not he fits in all of Barcelona. I think if you're underrated by your own fans, I think that makes you a pretty underrated player.
So I find this topic very interesting, Dan, and I almost got, there's a Spanish word which you talk about churros y tácticas. We literally just finished recording this week's pod, and I bring it up because the word I used was ventajista, and I said I'm sure the English equivalent will come up, and I still haven't found it. It still hasn't hit my brain. It's not advantageous. I mean, that it would literally be the transition, but it's used differently in Spain. But why do I say? Oh gosh, I'm going to be stuck again for finding a word that describes ventajista. It's basically taking advantage of the situation, as in now that we see Rakitic play a phenomenal match over the Clásico, we say that he's the most underrated player. You know, everybody's coming out of the closet. Even Jose Mourinho, for crying out loud, has had, you know, wonderful words to say about the Croatian sensation. And, you know, you will never, or I shouldn't say you'll never hear me say a bad word about him, because that's not entirely true. I've been quite critical of him this particular season, but there's no doubt about his track record in Football Club Barcelona, and I still think he has a lot to offer and a lot to give. And, you know, does he deserve the renewal of his contract and everything? I think that's up for debate. When it comes to underrated player, to answer your question directly, do I think it's Ivan Rakitic? No, I don't. I've been quite disappointed with what I saw from him, what I've been seeing from him on a week-to-week basis, and that makes me doubt whether Barca is making the right decision by renewing his contract, thereby, you know, I don't know if he's getting a salary increase. I think right now he's earning around 12 million or between 8 and 12 million, something like along those lines. And he's also entering that phase where pretty soon we're going to be talking about him being on the wrong side of 30.
Yeah.
So my worry is, you know, the long term. I have no, you know, again, I'm going to repeat myself here. There's no doubt that he's a phenomenal player, that he can still give a lot to Barca. My worry is, in the long term, will he stop the progression of other players? From time to time, he can still be brilliant. We saw it in a Clásico. He's phenomenal. On a weekly basis, that's where I worry about whether he will, you know, be able to perform at the level that this Barca squad needs. So I would propose Artur being maybe the most underrated player. I know everybody's raving about him, rightfully so, but, you know, seeing the impact that he had on the second Clásico when he came in, where at least in that first half, Barca looked like a different team to the one that we saw in the second leg of the Copa del Rey. That's a lot more to the Barca that I'm used to seeing, that I grew up seeing, and that I want to see.
Well, it seems like before I let you stick on Artur, we'll revisit your concrete pick at the end, but I want to go back to the back line for a bit. That this last month, Barcelona, it was this dreaded month, this nightmare month with the schedule, And
No doubt about
Barcelona
it.
wind up not losing any match. They drop a few points, but look at the league table. It winds up not really mattering in the long run. They're still in every competition. They've been the final of the Copa del Rey, and
Yeah.
they need one goal against Lyon. But the bigger number for me, as far as underrating players on Barcelona, is that 0 that's still working in Barcelona's favor against Lyon, and a lot of that is due to not only the form of Gerard Piqué, but then the we'll say under the radar signing of Clement Lenglet, who
Yes.
is unlike Piqué and Umtiti. He is a reactive defender, and there is a worry that those kind of guys, the Javier Mascherano's, don't necessarily fit or don't necessarily give a lot of confidence to Kool-Aid's, and yet he's fit in like a glove. I've said it's been brave defending from him a lot of the time, and he's had very, very few poor performances, if you will. Most of his are exactly what we've come to expect, which I think is in the same line or same vein as Artur. It's what makes them underrated because we now have a baseline floor, an expectation for what they're going to give us, and that expectation of performance is already pretty high. And I think a similar thing can be said of Marc-Andre Ter Stegen, where we now expect him to be a top 1-2 goalie in the world, and we almost expect the 1-2 saves.
It's a given now.
Right. And Kevin Williams has even said in pundits, and there's actually a really good piece by, unfortunately the name escapes me, but in The Athletic about Marc-Andre Ter Stegen, because of his height. He's not a superior height goalie like a Courtois, even like a David De Gea. They're much taller than Ter Stegen, so Ter Stegen has to get his timing perfectly, and that's what makes his acrobatic saves and his cat-like reflexes so impressive, because his timing has got to be picture perfect. And I think we almost, because he's in net and because he's not a part of these goal-scoring barrages that Barcelona are capable of, we do kind of forget him as well. And then Jordi Alba, you talked about over 30, he's got that new contract, and so maybe that new contract kind of takes him out of the running for this underrated thing, but he's been... and I think people recognize, though, I don't know if you can count him underrated as well, because he's been kind of the consensus best left back in Spain, maybe the best left back in a major league this season. He's been that good and that important to the side.
Yeah, or you can even argue the best left back that Spain or Barca has ever had in their history.
Yeah, I guess I threw a lot at you, but
There's
how do
a
you
lot
pick
in what you said. Yeah,
But how do you pick through the defense, and how do you pick through which players might be underrated, or which ones do you think we fully understand their role?
I'll tell you what, I think in the cases of Marc Ter Stegen and Jordi Alba, the word underrated cannot be attributed to them. I think they've been getting the recognition that they rightfully deserve, as well as Piqué. He's been outstanding this season and had stellar performances in key phases of matches and important ones at that. Lenglet, though, that's a very interesting pick, and I think you're right. For the longest of times, he's been flying under the radar, just quietly going about his business, doing his job. And even I remember quite recently an article I wrote about about the future of Barca, where I even gave a prediction as to what I suspect the lineup will be next season, and I put Lenglet ahead of Umtiti, and I got a lot of backlash for it. But right now, I think that is a valid question. How Umtiti will return to the squad is yet to be seen. Maybe we'll see it next weekend against Rayo Vallecano. But let's also not forget that Umtiti, before suffering that detrimental injury, he had some serious dips in his performances. He had some very, very questionable nights that led to either Barca suffering a defeat. I'm thinking the night at Roma as well, for example. And the question now has to be asked, with 100% healthy Umtiti, does he automatically go back into that starting lineup, or should it be Lenglet? And right now, my pick will be Lenglet, because he has been phenomenal. Everything you just described was 100% accurate. He sacrifices his entire body for the team. I wonder how many costillas, how many ribs he still has left over, because he got a couple of good ones knocked against him there, against his rib cage. And he's been flawless. He's adjusted and adapted to this club, the playing style according to Valverde's wishes, just flawlessly, and that would be a very good pick, Dan, in terms of underrated player, certainly. But I'll stick to my guns and say that Artur. I mean, a lot has been said about him, but I think I was craving for him to join that team again, to get some control back into that midfield. And I think when he did in that second Clásico in La Liga, when he was out there on the pitch in that first half, we just saw a little bit of what me personally at least want to see more of this team, and I feel like not a lot has been talked about that. So I'll go and say Artur.
For this, my pick for Barcelona's most underrated player, I think this season it has to go with, I guess my gut is kind of saying Gerard Piqué, for the simple reason that he, in his career, has had good stretches of form, and then we know that he's been in bad form. And I think the reason for me this season he's underrated is because we don't think of ever needing to take him out of a team when you go even last season when he wasn't at his best, or 2 years ago I don't think it was his best, and then you go back 3 years when he was as good as he is now. And the other thing in the back of our minds is there are people wondering, and with PK you wonder, is this his final season? Is this a choice that he's going to make, or is it next season? What a shock that would be, right? We say no, but then in the same respect, PK, of those post-30 guys, the core of that team, right, between Busquets, Messi, Alba, and PK, we'll say, those four, who's closest to hanging it up? And Gerard Piqué is always the answer, right? He's always the one closest to. We think that he'll call it quits earlier than the rest, simply because it's kind of comments that he's made and the personality and all that is. But clearly, based on form and what he's been capable of this season, it doesn't look like he needs to be doing that or thinking about that very soon. But he is post 30 as well, and just the leadership he's had along the back line as well. I have to say it's been so pivotal. His personality has been so important to the team, and in the same way that what's off the field can sometimes be as important as on the field. And he, in a way that Coutinho and Dembele absorb so much of the abuse, we'll say, in the Spanish media in particular, Piqué, he's the one who navigates. He's the captain of all the others, who sits there, takes the questions, causes the buzz, and maybe it's a little self-inflicted, but in the same way, it takes all the attention off everyone else. And I think his teammates kind of, in a sense, do appreciate that Piqué just kind of takes it and absorbs it and, hears his boos where he does. And he's a guy that the Bernabeu that's hated more than all the rest.
Absolutely. And let's go one step further. I mean, he even feeds off of that. He wants that. So, he looks for that kind of responsibility and reaction from the crowd, and it drives his motivation. So, 100% accurate there. I mean, I agree with those points you make for sure.
So those are our picks, and I think as you heard, now, Diego, you had much more conviction with your Artur one than me, and that one's hard to deny as well. I think the reason I almost didn't put him in that category was because of the recent injury, and he has missed a portion of the most important month of the season. But certainly if we revisit this in a few weeks or months, depending on the way Artur and his role in the next coming weeks when the matches, will say, truly, truly matter, I think we can all change our tune. It's going to depend on how the team ends the season.